II, you were not able to live in other neighborhoods if you were a person of color. So that's also why the Fillmore became, even pre-World War II, known as the most diverse neighborhood west of the Mississippi. And pre-World War II, there actually were two jazz clubs, or three jazz clubs, sorry, in the Fillmore. The first being Jacks of Sutter, which was on Sutter Street near Fillmore. And that was opened in 1932 and ran by an African-American couple. And then the Town Club joined them. And this is the problem with getting old. I'm starting to forget my names. There was a third club, which I'll have to look up in a second and I can tell you.
This is David Johnson, who actually came in the 40s to study at the what became the San Francisco Art Institute on the GI Bill with Ansel Adams. In fact, he wrote to Ansel Adams, and Ansel Adams invited him. And there's actually now an exhibit. So he came and studied with Ansel Adams, opened a photography studio in the Western Addition, and for many years, people would go, and he also documented the neighborhood. And so when we finally discovered him, basically when Liz and I met, we discovered he and a number of other families that were of photographers and also of some of the jazz club owners who had who actually had many of the photographs that we'd seen at Red Powell's. This is one of his photographs taken from Sutter and from Post and Fillmore, looking south toward the Fillmore Auditorium. And next to that is a building that was actually one of the first or second synagogues commissioned in San Francisco that later became a church and was actually the People's Temple.
This is an ad in the Sun Reporter for David Johnson's photo studio that was on Divisadero Street.
So when I finally found the photographs that Reggie had rescued, there were a number. Some of them were framed and some of them were stuffed in Safeway bags, and but we noticed there were a lot of photographs from the clubs that a lot of photographers could make a living, and so many of whom were self-taught, where they would photograph in the clubs, go home and develop the pictures they did with their speed graphic, and come back before 5 or 6 in the morning and sell the prints to the patrons and some of the performers that they had photographed. We love this of the dual flash unit, which was a great way for him to deal with the sort of difficult lighting. This is, that's Red Powell in front of his shoe shine parlor. This was from his collection that Reggie rescued. That's him on the right. And here you see in the background, all the photographs are on his wall that he would not let me photograph. It's sort of interesting here. You see pictures of Bobby Kennedy, Joseph Stalin, Sitting Bull, and Bobby Freeman, who had a big hit in the 60s and 70s, who was from San Francisco.
The Swim.
Yes. And here's Reggie across the street. And in the African-American community, barber shops, beauty parlors, mortuaries, or usually the visual archivists. And so he knew that there was something valuable across the street and was actually very excited when I was excited that he had rescued the photographs.
One of the reasons that that Red was so angry and didn't want to talk to either Lou or myself, because the Fillmore Auditorium was right across the street from what was his 5th location of his shoe shine parlor. And the reason that he was so bitter is because he had watched the demolition of his neighborhood. He had worked downtown in the early 1950s at a shoe shine parlor, saved up all his money to buy his own parlor, opened it up in the Fillmore neighborhood in 1954. And so by the time that I tried to go in and talk to him and he threw me out, his parlor had been moved by the Redevelopment Agency 5 times. And so each time that he would move, they would say, okay, you're going to be here for now. And they would demolish the building that he was in before. And then a little bit of time would go by they come back and say, okay, we're going to demolish this building, you have to move again. So it's understandable that he was a little ticked off by the time in the 1980s when we both tried to talk to him.
James Baldwin did a documentary in San Francisco I think in the 60s called Take This
1964.
54, 64?
Yeah, 64.
Yeah. Called Take This Hammer, and there's an incredible interview with Red there that he did, which we discovered later. So in the collection of photographs that Reggie had rescued, many of the photographs some of them were framed and beautifully shaped, and some of them were not in really good shape. And I actually learned Photoshop restoring these photographs. I was a film photographer. I was teaching it. I was very comfortable, and I had some students that would go to this new digital technology. And much to his credit, one of the students who was helping me said, you really need to do this yourself. And so when I was invested in it, I learned how to both restore and manipulate and produce images digitally, and it changed my whole career. Whoops, let's see, here we go. So, and for me, I know there's a controversy about kind of historical photographs. I was really interested in restoring these photographs to the way they looked when the photographers made them. I thought that was really important because I wanted to kind of restore history, because that's really what it happened, that this history had been erased when many of the clubs and the houses that people lived in and the Victorians were torn down by the Redevelopment Agency for a variety of reasons, one of which was to maybe modernize San Francisco. And I think there were some people that really did not like having a large Black population right in the prime real estate in San Francisco. So I was going to, you see the gentleman on the right. I have a good friend, Jules Allen, who grew up in San Francisco, and I knew he grew up in the Fillmore. And so I was showing him the book when it first came out, and he stopped dead in this photograph because that's a picture of his father in Jimbo's Waffle House. And you can see that they look a lot alike. So we've gotten a number of those where people have seen photographs of relatives of theirs from the period that they'd never seen before. So it's been really gratifying to restore that.
So if anybody sees any photos and recognizes where they're located or who's in the photos, please send us an email through our website, harlemofthewestsf.com, or in the chat or question and answer chat section of our Zoom talk.
Yes. Here's a barber shop on Fillmore, and there was a period in the 50s when a lot of men got their hair conked. You see there's jars of concholine in the background. And I was remembering that Malcolm X fell asleep with the lie in his hair and woke up with his scalp burning. And so it was a sort of interesting time and an aesthetic that then changed. This is a vaudeville performer, bicycle, and he's in front of a movie theater that also would have a live show, much like the Apollo in Harlem. And we were interested both in because a lot of these were not dated, but that the kind of war posters kind of date that this must have been in the around the Korean War period.
So during the heyday of the Fillmore, there was 7 movie theaters in the neighborhood, and many of them would have these shows in between each film. And once or twice a week, 2 of the movie theaters would have talent shows. And that is where both Etta James and her cousin Sugar Pie DeSanto were discovered by Johnny Otis. So it was quite the thing in the neighborhood if you won one of those talent shows, and in several cases led to international careers.
So I've shown you pictures from many of the clubs, and this is actually in the basement of the Booker T. Washington Hotel, and you see on the left is Ella Fitzgerald with her white gloves folded. And next to her is little Robert Lee, who we saw photographs of, and then next to him is Don Newcomb, and then of the Dodgers, and Joe Perry of the San Francisco 49ers, and a number of prominent people. I love that rug, and I love the Argyle socks of the gentleman on the right. There's a lot of things that we kind of discovered by with clues, because a lot of times there were not people there to describe them. Here's an ad for the Booker T. Washington Hotel.
So there were two big hotels in the Fillmore district, Booker T. Washington Hotel, and then this one, the Manor Plaza. And anyone who was anyone in the African-American community would stay there. The reason being was that until the late 1950s, anyone who was playing at a club downtown, like the Fairmont, you had to be a huge star, like Duke Ellington here. But you weren't allowed to stay there. You had to go back to the Fillmore and stay in either Manor Plaza or the Booker T. Washington Hotel. But what was wonderful is that this created the vibrant music scene in the Fillmore district, because Duke Ellington would come back to the neighborhood, and these amazing parties in the basements of both hotels would happen. And there's also a little stage, and so people would have jam sessions.
And then the after hours places also began. This is the couple that owned the Manor Plaza, and you can see a poster for Louis Jordan, and there he is, second from the right, with a DJ named Little Tiny, of course.
And the couple was named the McCoys. They also owned a club, which is pictured here, called the Pre Milan Ballroom. It was a roller skating rink during the day, and then several evenings a week, the Pre Milan would have mainly R&B and jump blues shows.
This is a David Johnson photograph.
And it's Amos Milbourne's band.
So, you know, obviously there these photographs many times were signed by people in them, and we were interested in the style. And the other thing that everybody says is that they said it was on the best times of their life, that there was kind of full employment until economic downturns, and people were really happy and had places to hang out, and especially people who had migrated from the South. That there was still certainly segregation and restrictions in San Francisco, but it was not anywhere near the extent that it was in the places that people had come from, mostly Louisiana and Texas.
So the slide that you just saw was Jack's of Sutter. That was the very first jazz club in the Fillmore district. As I mentioned before, it opened in 1932. It
then relocated to Geary and Fillmore, and is now the Boom Boom Room, the place.
Yes, it was another place that got relocated by redevelopment.
This is Frank Jackson sitting in with a group called the Four Naturals. And we were thrilled that the first time we showed work from this collection, he played, which was great. And he's been a great supporter. He just passed a little while ago, but to be able to sort of talk to the people in many of these photographs while they were still with us has been really thrilling for Elizabeth and I. This is an unknown group celebrating a record release. And we were also interested in the ads in the background, sort of give you an idea of the sort of atmosphere. This is another David Johnson photograph in front of a bar called the Doghouse. Elizabeth, you can talk about this.
So when David Johnson first gave us this photograph, he told us that it was taken outside of the Melrose Record Shop, which was on Fillmore Street. And the Melrose Record Shop was the record shop in the Fillmore neighborhood. It was owned by a Jewish guy named David Rosenbaum, who had been a lifelong jazz fan. And so one of the amazing things that has happened over the course of the decades that Louis and I have been researching the Fillmore history is that so many things have, so much information and so many things have come to light, especially because of the internet. So I had always wanted to read the Sun Reporter newspapers, which Sun Reporter was the African-American newspaper out of the Fillmore. It started in the late 1940s, but no one seemed to have any copies of the Sun Reporter archive until just a few years ago, when UC Berkeley put the Sun Reporter archive from 1951 until present day on microfilm. So I ordered a library loan and sat in entire summer in my local library. I live down in Ventura County now, and looked through every page of the Sun Reporter, and through reading the newspaper, found out, and in fact, that this photo was David Rosenbaum's first record shop, which was just down the street from Jack's of Sutter, also on Sutter Street, and it was called Rhythm Records. So David opened this record shop right after World War II, and he also started a label of the same name, Rhythm Records. And he did it with a gentleman over in Oakland named Bob Gettings, who eventually took it over from David. So this is a photograph taken outside of Rhythm Records on Sutter Street, not Melrose.
Also in the window is a sign for a rhythm and blues hit called Bilbo is Dead, which was celebrating the death of a senator and former governor of Mississippi named Bilbo. More David Johnson pictures from clubs. This is actually from Frank Jackson, and I love this picture of musicians in daylight, not completely comfortable.
So I want to talk about the way that redevelopment was talked about in both the Chronicle and the Examiner. So you've just seen a bunch of photographs taken post-World War II and early 1950s. During this same time, government officials were talking about redevelopment of the Fillmore neighborhood. And redevelopment wasn't something that was new to the United States. It actually started in the 1920s. Planners were talking about that back then, but then you have, sorry, I'm having a blank. You have World War II and you have the Depression that both halted any kind of redevelopment happening. But as soon as World War II happened and ended, redevelopment started to be discussed again. And this was happening all over the United States, not just in San Francisco. So the first redevelopment happened downtown in an area that was known as the Old Produce District. There weren't really a lot of people living down there, and it was an enormous success. And it's what we now know as the Embarcadero Center area. So having the success of that, they decided that it was time to have the Fillmore redeveloped. And so they started this narrative in both the Examiner and the Chronicle that paints life in the Fillmore as these slums and these poor children. There's a supposed child in this story here talking about how he lives in this 7-year-old lives in this slum and it's rat infested, and we need to save this child from these terrible living conditions. And the words slum and blighted are used over and over in these stories. But as you just saw in the photographs that were taken at the same time by African-American photographers, the reality of what was going on in the neighborhood was very different from what was being portrayed in these articles. And really what it was to get mainstream support of the redevelopment process and make it acceptable to the general community.
And there were a number of crime stories, yeah.
Yeah, again, you see here a photograph of a supposed kitchen in the Fillmore district that, who knows if that was really taken in the Fillmore. Again, trying to paint this picture that it was this blighted neighborhood that needed to be torn down and built from the ground up.
So, simultaneously, things like this would happen. This is actually, we had this photograph, we knew it was Eartha Kitt, but we didn't know the circumstances. But it turns out this was a yearly party for deliverers of the Sun Reporter, the newspaper boys, and they got to come and meet Eartha Kitt. And the young man on the far left is Danny Duncan, who we have since met, and who's actually working on a musical history of the Fillmore, because his mother had an after-hours place, and this is him. So that we've done that. Elizabeth has done a number of these oral histories that are also on the website, and some are in the book. And so we were able to access his family pictures growing up. And also kind of in 1951, looking at the sort of ethnic makeup of the neighborhood, that after World War II, a number of the Japanese families did move back. Not all of them, some of them would stayed away because of bitterness. And this is his mother, who had this after-hours place in her house on Scott Street.
So as you can see, this photo was taken around the same time as those articles were being written. And certainly there was no blight nor rat-infested kitchens or anything else. It was this picture, this narrative that the Examiner and the Chronicle were trying to sell to San Franciscans.
There was I know when we've done a couple of the projects in the library where people were restoring photographs, that there was a sort of idea that the Victorians were kind of rat traps just because they were old, and there was this push in the 50s for modernism. But what happened from redevelopment was that before that, there had never been any architectural preservation. And one of the direct results of the sort of wholesale destruction, or that was actually stopped in the middle, was that organizations were formed to try to ensure the integrity of certain architecture. And I think that was one of the results. This is an interesting photograph because this is a wedding party taken in the 50s. And we were sort of always curious. So what happened when the Japanese came back, and in some cases, some of their houses and business were occupied by African Americans. And here's an example you can see of a wedding party and people getting together. And in fact, this photograph influenced a playwright who did a play that was at ACT called After the War, because of that. This photograph kind of answers that, at least that part of the question. There was, there was obviously, it wasn't completely smooth, but for a variety of reasons, not the least of which was sort of common oppression by the society, people did get along. And we've heard stories of people with the after hours clubs, when they came back to move in the neighborhood, they would come and hear the music or wait outside like young boys. So there was a kind of cultural connection.
So this is a photo that photo was taken in Jackson's Nook, that had been a Japanese restaurant before World War II, but then when the Japanese Americans were interned, an African-American concert promoter took it over, and it turned into Jackson's Nook, which was a jazz club.
This is Saunders King, and we've got his information. He had one of the major hits from a San Francisco performer called S.K. Blues that was all over the country.
So Saunders was one of the few musicians from the Fillmore that actually had a national presence, and he had the house band at Jaxo Sutter for many, many years.
His daughter is Deborah Santana, who actually just did an incredible program at MOAD, who's also been very generous to us with her father's information. So this is the Gold Mirror. Yeah, go ahead.
So this is the Gold Mirror, and it's another club that was only allowed whites in until a woman named Leola King took it over in the early 1950s and turned it into what she called the Blue Mirror.
And actually, when we first were working on the book, we approached her and she said that she had lost all of her photographs in a fire and had nothing for us. And so when the first edition that was published by Chronicle Books in 2006 came out, there's a picture of the Mills brothers performing with their father. She loved the book and actually made her archive available to us. We had a number of those kinds of stories that when people sort of saw the book and what had happened. Here's Louis Armstrong with his wife and the Blue Mirror. Here's Lena Horne signing an autograph. Edward G. Robinson. It was, the Fillmore was actually a kind of go-to place during this time, both in terms of during the evenings and after hours. This is Leola, who's second from the right, who at one point was one of the wealthiest women in San Francisco, who had property in a number of places.
She's actually the wealthiest person, not man or woman, in San Francisco.
This is a picture in her Scott Street, a mansion with her mother. Here she is with Josephine Baker. I know when I showed her this picture, she wanted me to Photoshop out the guy in the middle, but I didn't do that. And here she is with Wesley Johnson, who had the Texas Playhouse. I think this was a party celebrating the fact that Lottie, the body, who's in the blonde hair on the right, was about to go on tour to Asia.
So somebody is asking us to repeat Leola. It's Leola, L-E-O-L-A, King. And her father actually came to the Fillmore first in the 1940s and opened a very, very popular barbecue joint on Webster and Fillmore. And then, and Leola worked there for a time, and then she opened her club in the early 1950s, and it lasted until the mid 1960s, when Redevelopment told her that she had to close. Leola was amazing because she actually fought the Redevelopment Agency until the day she died. She lost everything. She, like we mentioned, she's the wealthiest person in all of San Francisco, and lost everything to Redevelopment, but she never gave up the fight. She was determined till the end to try and be compensated for everything that was taken away from her.
And she was beautiful till the very end, really a striking woman.
So this is Lottie the body at the Champagne Supper Club. Champagne Supper Club is another example of the changes that happened in the neighborhood during World War II. It was once known as Cherryland. It was a Japanese American-owned supper club. And then when the Japanese Americans were taken to internment camps, African Americans took over the club and called it the Champagne Supper Club. And this is Lottie the body jumping over T-Bone Walker's head at the Champagne Supper Club. She's a stunningly beautiful woman.
We got a chance to meet her and talk to her in Detroit. She just passed just recently also. And it's been really gratifying, you know, to sort of and many times meet people that we'd seen photographs of for years and get a chance to sort of hear their stories directly. And there are a lot of people that we missed because they passed before we were able to talk to them or find them. Here's Elizabeth and Lottie in Detroit. So this was the Club Flamingo that was taken over by Wesley Johnson, and he, because a lot of people came from both Louisiana and Texas, changed the name of the Club Flamingo to the Texas Playhouse. And here he is, he's the second from the left. And his trademark was this white Stetson hat. And there was always a lot of kind of artwork on many of the clubs. These are, you can see, these are posters of people who had Texas roots, including Saunders King and Ivory Joe Hunter and Teddy Wilson and Eddie Taylor. We met his son, actually, when we were doing a tour of the Fillmore, and someone was sort of correcting some things we were saying, and it turned out it was his son who who was a pharmacist in the Fillmore, and when he went to UCSF, and when they needed tuition, they took the dollar bills down, including the silver dollars in the bar, and paid that tuition.
So there wasn't any live music at the Texas Playhouse. What would happen is that Wesley Johnson, as you saw there with the microphone, would get behind the bar and do this kind of patter, and then DJ play records. And it was quite the gathering place. It was crowded every night. And as you can see by these photos, people really dressed to go out. And several people told us that what they would do is they get off work on Friday, they'd go home, dress up, and they wouldn't go home until Sunday evening, because there is that much going on within the 20 square blocks of the Fillmore neighborhood. There's probably, during its height, over 20 nightclubs, after hours clubs, and bars in the Fillmore.
There were also churches and other kinds of organizations, but nobody seemed to photograph. We haven't found many photographs from the churches. This is Wesley with T-Bone Walker. Here's an ad for the Club Flamingo, I think, when he first opened it. And here's actually, I believe this was actually in one of the churches in the Fillmore, and that's young Wesley Jr., Wesley the Third, actually. Third. Yes, sitting at the pew. The other thing was somebody painted these amazing paintings that were all over. Turned out it was the person who designed Fisherman's Wharf and also the Paramount Theater in Oakland. And we actually found these photographs. Someone had rescued them and given them to their neighbors in the Fillmore. And so for a while, we actually showed them when we first showed the work, although we've kind of lost touch. I'm hoping that they're still in good shape, because they had actually been very well preserved.
Lou, can you go back to slides for a second, please? So in this slide, you can see that there's a photograph of a singer behind the bartender in white. That photograph was actually among the images that Reggie Pettis rescued from Red Powell's shoeshine parlor. So what happened was that the Texas Playhouse in the mid-1960s, like so many other businesses along Fillmore Street, they were told by the redevelopment agency that they had to close. They were given no money if they didn't own the building. They were simply told, you have to leave. If they were lucky, they got moved to another part of the Fillmore. But in many cases, especially by the mid-1960s, they just had to close. And so what probably happened is that Wesley was closing up, quickly took his collection of photos and brought them over to Red for safekeeping. And the mural, go on, Lou.
That was it. That was just that basically the whole idea is they knew if he was going to continue, and much like what Reggie did, they knew that they wanted to give it to someone that would honor and protect this legacy. So my friend, of course, who I'm not going to remember, but this is her uncle who lived in the East Bay, and they would come to the Fillmore every weekend and go to the clubs. And you can see that they're sitting at a table in front of this Lionel Hampton painting that we had shown before. So again, these interesting stories are expanded, and in some cases we've included them in the book, and sometimes we hear about them later. But I think that the narrative is really pretty broad, and this is a universal story, actually. So one of the persons who spent a lot of time in San Francisco was Billie Holiday. This is actually photographed by Jerry Stoll, who was the official photographer at the Monterey Jazz Festival and photographed throughout the Bay Area for many years. And he actually gave me a copy of this picture, which started a whole series I've been doing about different pictures of Billie Holiday. Here she is with Mel Torme.
That's at Amon's Breakfast Club that was underneath the Temple Theater on Fillmore Street. And this
Here
is
she is with West. And
Wesley John.
in the background is a poster for the Tappers Inn, which was a club in Richmond, where I live now. So the Norrland Swing Club was another sort of club appealing to transplants from Louisiana.
And actually, Billie appeared there for over a month, but it was unfortunately closed down by the feds because the owner of it was not paying his taxes. So this is,
go ahead.
So this is a photograph of one of the few photographs that we have of Charles Sullivan, known as the mayor of the Fillmore. And Charles Sullivan had his first club actually down in San Mateo, and then came to San Francisco and started buying up leases in different buildings. He had a liquor store in the Fillmore district. He ran a bunch of jukeboxes in different bars and restaurants around the neighborhood. And he was also the person who got the lease on the Fillmore Auditorium. And the Fillmore was actually, at that time, the Ambassador roller skating rink. And Charles turned it back into a nightclub and began booking pretty big named acts. And he became one of the largest promoters of African-American music west of the Mississippi. And so his circuit would start up in Seattle and go through Portland and then down into San Francisco and sometimes even down into Los Angeles.
That's Lionel Hampton wearing Wesley's Stetson hat. Liz, is also going to be 1 o'clock, so we should keep moving along.
Okay.
So it's interesting. My friend John Goddard, who had Village Music, said that when he was 14, he took the bus into San Francisco to see Little Richard at a concert that Charles Sullivan was promoting. And he was both fascinated and frustrated by the fact that Little Richard had this left-handed guitarist who was very flamboyant. And it turned out it was Jimi Hendrix. We also heard that Little Richard fired Jimi Hendrix because he was too weird. We've also heard some scholars say that Jimi Hendrix never played with Little Richard at the Fillmore, but John took this picture. So this idea of facts being a moving target has always been an issue. Well, it's just a reality of people remembering things from the past.
And so
this is from go ahead.
This is from the Crystal Ballroom, which is in Portland, Oregon. And my husband and I were up there last Christmas, and I saw a poster of, it was Ike and Tina Turner. I'm like, oh my gosh, this looks just like the posters that Charles Sullivan used to do for the Fillmore. And then as we were walking down the stairs, because the ballroom's set up a lot like the Fillmore, where the ballroom's on an upper floor, there was this little montage of images honoring Charles Sullivan. So yes, in fact, it was the club that he booked along his West Coast circuit.
This is Ricardo Alvarado, whose daughter is a good friend of mine, and he came in the first wave of Filipinos, bachelors who came in the 30s. He taught himself photography. He worked in the Presidio in the kitchen and ended up documenting life, and lived in the Western Addition and documented life in the Fillmore. He also documented life in rural and urban California of Filipino and Hispanic life. And we were able to use some of his photographs. And this idea of stories and the photographers was very interesting to us as we did our research. This is a Jackson's Nook, is that right?
Yeah, Jackson's Nook.
And here's a house party. We love this. There was probably eclectic group of musicians. And I love the wallpaper.
I again want to point out that those photos were taken in the early 1950s,
Right.
when those articles in the Chronicle Examiner were painting the neighborhood as a slum.
This is on Thanksgiving Day in the Presidio. This is Vernon Ali, who was actually another one of the musicians who got international fame. He toured with, I think, with Lionel Hampton and a number of other people. He was a bassist who we met before he passed. And there's his brother, Eddie Ali, who was actually very generous with us in terms of his imagery and his stories. This is a picture of he and his wife on their wedding day. And here they are together, actually at a celebration honoring the integration of the Musicians Union in San Francisco that didn't happen until the late 60s.
Late 50s.
Late 50s. I think it was later than that. That was the whole point, was that San Francisco was supposed to be so progressive and they didn't integrate, Black musicians couldn't play east of Van Ness for many years. Anyway. So one of the clubs that we'd heard a lot about was Jimbo's Bop City, which was located on Post during the whole time it was in existence. And we were able to meet Jimbo, and we've certainly heard a lot of stories about it. And both Reggie and we met Steve Jackson, who was the official photographer, which Liz can sort of talk a little bit more about. But it was a club that was known all over the world, actually, and a lot of the musicians who came to San Francisco would come to it after hours because there was a rhythm section set up, and they would sit in and prove themselves. And it was also, chicken shop.
So Bop City actually started out in the late 1940s. It was one of those spaces that Charles Sullivan leased, and he leased it to Slim Gaillard, who called it Vout City. And Slim was an interesting musician, but definitely not a businessman, and eventually skipped town owing Charles Sullivan a bunch of money. So Charles approached Jimbo Edwards and asked if he would like to run a restaurant. So actually Bop City started out as Jimbo's Waffle House, and you saw a photograph inside the Waffle House very early in our talk. But the musicians discovered that there was this back room that wasn't being used. So they asked if they could set up and do jam sessions. And so soon the jam sessions became more popular than the Waffle House. And what surprises people is that it actually was only open from 2 a.m. until 6 a.m. And so after the regular clubs closed, people would come to Bop City from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. And then go home and get ready for church Sunday mornings. And this is Steve Jackson, who I found out about when I was taking a cab ride to the Fillmore, and happened to start talking with the cab driver. And he said, oh, I used to play cards with this guy that said he was a photographer at some of the clubs. And he's like, I'll try and get a hold of him. And stupidly, I got out of the cab without getting his contact information. So I stewed about it for a month, kicking myself that I didn't get his phone number. And then out of the blue, he called and said, I have the number and he's willing to meet with you. So I went to his house at Hunters Point, which is where this photograph was taken. And after he brought me down to his man cave in the basement of the house, and it was 10 o'clock in the morning, but he still served me some wine, and we had a few drinks, and then he pulled back his curtains and showed me this incredible collection of photographs, because he was the house photographer of Bop City. So many of these images you're about to see are taken by Steve Jackson Jr. And we're so grateful to Steve, who has since passed away, and to his family for allowing us to use so many of the images.
Here's a picture of Bop City with, if you look in the upper right hand, there's Dizzy Gillespie and Miles Davis and a number of other really well-known musicians all having a wonderful time. And you can see it's also was an after hours. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. You could talk a little bit about this mural, but we'll get to him in a minute. The other thing was I'd seen all these photographs of this space, And it turned out this building was moved around the corner to Fillmore Street and was Marcus Books for many years, and it's no longer. But the space was very small, which was always sort of surprising, you know, the idea that photographs. Maybe just quickly talk about who he was, and then we'll keep going.
So this is Harry Smith. He is a well-known musicologist, experimental filmmaker, artist. So Harry was a huge jazz fan, lived over in Berkeley, finally was staying in the jazz club so much that he moved first above Jackson's Nook, and then Jimbo Edwards became kind of his art patron and said, you can live above Bop City if in exchange for doing murals in Bop City. So you can see him here sitting in front of one of the murals that he painted. And he was there until probably like 1952, and then decided to move to New York.
Where he lived in the Chelsea Hotel. This is actually a Jerry Stoll photograph taken in Jimbo's. This is Chico Hamilton. A lot of the bass players said that the house bass was so bad that they refused to play it, which is always interesting. Here's Johnny Mathis, San Francisco native, sitting in.
He went to Washington High School up on Geary.
And had to decide between becoming a track star or a singer. I think he made his choice. This is Jimbo with Herbert Kane. Here's Louis Armstrong and his wife in front of a poster, a mural, and also a poster for Jimbo for mayor. Roy Gonzalez of Duke Ellington. Paul Gonzalez. Thank you. This is Teddy Edwards, and we heard that the gentleman with the saxophone has just been asked to stop playing. This was like one of those things where if you'd sit in and if you didn't measure up, you were asked to stop. Although we must realize, did we figure out who she is? That she must have been able to play, because they would not have let her sit in if she couldn't.
We did. She was the wife of another jazz musician, but her name's escaping me.
Not Lenny Tristano's wife? Is that right?
I think that's just it.
Is Chet Baker?
He was stationed at the Presidio, and so he would sneak out of the barracks after lights went out and come to Bop City and jam, and then sneak back in before Reveille in the morning.
And this is Max Roach, and we think it may be Ben Webster, who's third from the left. Sammy Davis sitting in. We heard that Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack would come to Jimbo's. And Charlie Parker. The other thing was interesting is that the names of entertainers and athletes were painted on the backs of many of the chairs in the club.
And if they showed up, Jimbo would force the person in the chair to move so that the person could sit down. So
and
in the late
after hours, you know, where they weren't supposed to sell liquor, and also I think as part of this strategy to try to close the neighborhood, it was continually having difficulties with the police.
Well, also the police chief did not like the fact that there was interracial dating going on in the Fillmore clubs, and some of the jazz musicians said that he would target the clubs to try and discourage that. So he'd raid them.
Some of the literature, from the Redevelopment Agency. And then this is actually some photographs we got where they were surveying all the buildings, many of which were torn down later.
So what the Redevelopment Agency would do is they systematically went to every single building in the neighborhood, and you could see the numbers on the slide previous, and there would be a rating sheet for each building, and they would give it a rating of 1 to 10, as you know, for different things. And it was pretty shocking to read them. The San Francisco Public Library has the redevelopment archives, and I encourage people to go down there and look at these sheets to see what the rating system judged the neighborhood on.
So in the middle of this, actually, activists from the neighborhood stopped the process, and that's why this neighborhood had empty lots for many years, because they basically, people had already been displaced, but they stopped the destruction of a lot of the remaining buildings, and also made it so that many of the Victorians got moved rather than torn down. That's
So
how Jim got moved.
redevelopment was in two parts. So there was A1, and the neighborhood really didn't know what they were getting into in A1. But by the time A1 was almost finished, they certainly were pretty upset. So they created an organization called Waco, which sued the redevelopment agency and the city of San Francisco. And Waco actually won, and it was the first time in the history of the United States where the courts recognized that the neighborhood and the people who lived in it, even if they didn't own the houses or buildings in which they lived in or their businesses were in, had a right to have a say in what was going to happen to their neighborhood. So while it was too late, for the most part, for the Fillmore neighborhood, it actually set a precedent for the rest of the country, because as I mentioned before, redevelopment was happening in neighborhoods all over this country, and primarily in neighborhoods of color. And so this was a big deal when this happened, that finally people who lived in the neighborhood had a say in what was going to happen to their neighborhood.
So one of the spaces, you saw that picture before, this was what was originally a synagogue, a pattern that actually has happened in places like Harlem also. And Jim Jones took it over, and it became the People's Temple. And many of the people that would come to the People's Temple were people, either people or the descendants of people who had been displaced by this redevelopment. And they were kind of obviously looking for a connection that had been lost from before. So Jim Jones sort of was connected politically, but sort of started acting more and more strange, and then took a lot of people to Guyana. And many of the people who died in Guyana were, as I said, people that had been displaced in the Fillmore. So it's sort of this idea that the oppression that happened from redevelopment kind of manifested itself for generations afterwards. So we actually found photographs. This is a Steve Jackson picture taken at Jimbo's during a jam session. And on the left is John Handy. Next to him is Pointy Poindexter, who spent a lot of time in the Fillmore. Next to him is a young John Coltrane, who was probably in town and came to Jimbo's. And next to him is Frank Fisher, who is a trumpet player who lives in Richmond still. And when we first showed this work, John Handy and Frank Fisher played at the kind of celebratory concert that we had at the Performing Arts Library and Museum. So that picture became the cover of the first edition of the book by Chronicle Books in 2006. I won't talk about the tent, which we were never happy about, but it went out of print in 2010. And in the meantime, we've got a lot more information, a lot more material. And so we were able to republish ourselves a new version of the book with much better graphics, larger, and 100 pages more. And here's a picture of John Handy, who's been very supportive of our project.
So Lou, do you want to wrap it up and take, because we're at 1:20, we've gone a bit over to take questions, but I just wanted to mention that the new version of the book, volume 4, is now available through MOAD, and you can order it online. I'm sure they will post the link to where you can do that. And I think we can take questions now.
Okay. Yeah, I thought we had a picture of the new cover, but here's the website, and also you can order the book either through MOAD and their bookstore, and hopefully Elizabeth Cassell will reiterate that site. And let me just stop sharing. Hold on. Okay.
So yes, we encourage people to go to our website, harlemofthewestsf.com. On that website are all the interviews that we did for the book in their entirety. You know, you can only fit so much into the book itself, so you can read and in some cases actually listen to the interviews that we conducted for the book. So please go to our website and check that out. There's so much more information, and it's wonderful to hear the musicians and club owners and photographers talk about the history of the Fillmore.
I just saw a note that this has been recorded, so hopefully that recording can be sent out to everybody who registered for it, because I know a lot of people are not happy that they were not able to see this.
Yes, I have many angry many angry texts from my friends like, what's going on? So I'm not seeing any questions.
Go to the chat. There's, let's see. Ooh, we got something from Charles Sullivan's family. Oh.
Oh, someone
So
asked.
some people, I guess some people seem to be able to get on it, maybe through the MOAD site, because I just got on YouTube. But we should send out something. Anissa, do you have some questions, or Elizabeth?
Somebody is asking what jazz recordings are available from the Fillmore during that time. Well, sadly, not a lot, although just this morning, a woman radio reporter from KCBS sent us a link to a recording that her father and uncle did at Jack's of Sutter, probably in the late 40s or early 50s. And we're gonna share that on our Harlem of the West SF Facebook page and website. So if anyone can identify the band, please let us know. I'm wondering if it might be Saunders King. It's an incredible recording. It's kind of scratchy, but it really brings to life the excitement that there must have been in the clubs going to see live music. Also on our website, we have a couple of films that were shot in the Blue Mirror in the early 1960s. I think there's 2 of them. So again, I encourage you to go to our website. Lowell Folsom is playing a song in the Blue Mirror in the early 1960s, and it was filmed. So hopefully that link still works. It's on our website and you can check it out.
And the other thing is that both Elizabeth and I, Elizabeth especially, was the associate producer of a documentary that KQED did on the Fillmore. And in fact, we got a lot of the material for both the film and the book by putting the word out. And that is now available, is that right, on eBay? If you look up the Fillmore, maybe you have the correct information about that.
Yeah, I can post that later on our Fillmore Facebook page. So I also wanted to, someone just reminded me, there's some Sugar Pie DeSanto recordings. There's a great 2 or 3 CD set that was done probably about 10 years ago. Is a compilation of all the Rhythm Record recordings. Again, Rhythm Records was both a record store and a record label. And so this wonderful compilation was created. I think you can get it through Down Home Music. So you can, again, it's mainly R&B. There's no jazz on that, but you could check that out as well. And Saunders King also has a compilation of all of his recordings. Let's see. So
I also have a question from Richie Unterberger. I know about the Lowell Folsom film and the Blue Mirror, but you just mentioned 2 of them. Who is in the other one, if it's not Folsom?
I'd have to go on our website and look. My memory's not as good as it used to be. I'm getting old.
And how about, in the original, you say that Billie Holiday used to also play at the Redwood City Veterans Hall when she would come to SF to play clubs back in the day. Do you know the backstory about this?
I don't know anything about that.
I don't remember saying that we said that Billie Holiday used to play at the Redwood City Veterans Hall. She played at the New Orleans Swing Club in San Francisco, and she played at the Long Bar in San Francisco and a few other clubs as well. But I never read anything about her making it down to Redwood City. Maybe someone who's watching our talk could chime in if they know anything about that. The photos of Billie Holiday, do you have dates for those, Lou?
No, mostly not. I could probably find the one that I'll have to look, I'm not sure. I think they're probably in the 50s, I would think. It's interesting about Billie Holiday. There were fellows that I used to see that hung out by the Burger King, Fillmore, kind of north of Geary. And we were talking about Billie Holiday, and they said it didn't matter what kind of shape she was in. She was always so beautiful, everybody's mouth would fall open when she would walk by. And my good friend, Dan Collins, was the dentist, had an office for many years in the neighborhood. And he was Billie Holiday's dentist. And he said he told her that she'd never really had a man say that he loved her and that she believed him, and that was sort of the source of a lot of her blues and unhappiness, but probably also helped her with her art. So I was going to say that I've been because the thing that was interesting to me about her is that she hardly ever looked the same in photographs. Her physical appearance did change, but I think it was also her physical appearance and her being was elusive. And I've been collecting photographs. I have about 80 photographs of her, which I find really interesting, and it kind of reflects who she is as a person and as an artist also.
So someone's asking, what were the exact 20 blocks that made up the Fillmore district? So what the redevelopment agency did when they decided to do redevelopment is they took a map and basically drew this big red line that was from California, Van Ness, Oak, and Divisadero. So that was the area that they targeted for redevelopment. So if you can imagine, they were actually considering tearing down the iconic painted ladies, the Victorians that you see from the park right there. I mean, that was definitely on the chopping block. So it's hard to imagine if they had been successful, that whole area being wiped clean. But fortunately, that was part of A2, and Waco won their lawsuit, and all of that was stopped. So we're very, very fortunate that that happened. Someone else is asking about West Coast jazz has been referred to as cool jazz. Cool jazz was really the white jazz musicians. Dave Brubeck was a part of that.
It was also later than that period we were talking about.
Right, and it really was more of white jazz musicians. It didn't really, I guess Chet Baker would be the only one that played in the Fillmore that was part of the cool jazz movement.
Although Miles Davis actually at one point was kind of a part of that also. The other thing I was going to say about the neighborhood is one of the things the first things they did was, it used to be that Geary Street would go from the Bay to downtown, and one of its main intersections was Fillmore and Geary. And the first thing they did was to sink Fillmore below, and that actually killed a lot of the businesses because the idea was to make it for people in the avenues to be able to get downtown faster, but it basically meant that people would bypass the Fillmore. And I think that was something that it never really recovered from. I mean, there were efforts actually after the attempt to make the preservation district. Like the last slide I showed was, now on the street you see bricks that sort of show where some of the clubs were and some of the people were, some of which are wrong, but that there was a sort of renaissance at about 2000 where some businesses came back, but a lot of them did not last because most of the people had been displaced, and so there was not support. The Yoshi's was on Fillmore Street for a while, and it didn't last.
So someone's asking about the Both And Club. So the Both And Club, the building is still there on Divisadero, but it was kind of outside the time period of the Fillmore Jazz Era. It was when a lot of the clubs in the Fillmore district were closed down due to redevelopment. Divisadero Street became kind of the jazz center for San Francisco. And what's really amazing is that we had a talk at the Western Edition branch of the San Francisco Public Library, and the manager of the library, it's her father that started the Both And so I'm hoping to interview her in the next few months when we're all able to travel and mingle with each other in person and get the story of the Both And from her father. It was actually, you know, Bop City and the Both And were very tiny clubs. I mean, you can fortunately go see both buildings, and it's pretty shocking to walk into them and think that these extremely famous musicians played at these such tiny spaces. So if you're able to take a walk and go check that out. Someone else is asking about if we're going to do a similar study of 7th Street in Oakland. No, I think Lou and I, we have enough with the Fillmore.
Right. I have a lot of my friends from Oakland are not happy with me because I've said I'm going to leave that to someone else. But it is an incredible story and certainly related because it came the scene in Oakland has its roots from the same migration. And what was absolutely true was people brought their musical tastes and their cultural practices along with them when they came west. And that as a general story has been kind of what a lot of the work I've done since I became a photographer and archivist has been about. So maybe, I was gonna say hit us up in a couple of years, but I think that there's a lot of really some people that I think would be able to do a great job. Elizabeth and I both, it was interesting. This kind of took over our lives and it's been really good, but there's been a couple of times when we thought we were done. And of course it's never really done. And the fact that so many people signed up for this shows how much interest there is, both specifically in this story, but also this is a general kind of story that has applications in a lot of different places, especially now with what's been going on in the world. So I would say I'm just really gratified, and I've been told that this has been recorded and hopefully there'll be a way for people to access the whole thing, because I know some people were able to join it later on YouTube. And
I'll jump in really quick. I apologize about all of those tech issues. We were managed to get on YouTube Live. It has been recorded, and hopefully the entire thing was recorded and it did go on live. So we did pick up quite a few more people, and I did email every single participant. And my IT guy is in big trouble.
Don't be too mean with him, because it's trouble.
Things happen.
So hopefully also we're going to keep all the questions and the chats, and we will get back to people. You can also access us if you look up our website. You can get a hold of us because we're very interested. Every time we do this, we get new information about people and places, and also the questions are always really interesting. So I don't know if it's helpful for us to say our emails now, but maybe I will. You can reach me at lewatts@ucsc.edu. And Liz?
And you can reach me at OTW Front. It stands for On the Waterfront, otwfront@gmail.com. So if you've recognized anyone in the photographs that we've shown, or any of the businesses, and you're able to tell us anything about them, we would be very grateful if you would contact us, and then we will share that on both our Facebook page and on our website. The website really isn't there to be used by everyone. People can, if you do your own project, you're welcome to use the interviews. Just please credit the Harlem of the West SF project. But you know, we really have been the gatherers of this information, but we want everyone to be able to use it. It's important that people understand the history of this neighborhood.
I would do a proviso though. If you're interested in using any of the images, it's really important that you get permission from the families. We do not have the copyrights. We're able to use it in conjunction with the book, and as it should be, the permission, or if there's any remuneration, should go to the families of the photographers and the club owners who've been incredibly supportive of us. And that's been important to us. And we have stayed in their good graces by making sure that that happens.
Thank you for saying that, Lou. You're absolutely right. Yes, please do not use the photographs without the permission of the owners of the photographs, which are not us.
Anything else from either Elizabeth or Anissa?
Someone's asking if Leonard's Barbecue was part of the era you reference, and I don't know the answer to that. Do you, Lou?
No. But perhaps what we might do is post some of these questions also on the website, because I think we'll be able to keep them. And then if people have answers, or we can kind of get that information out.
Or on our Facebook page, maybe.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. All right.
Well, thank you.
Yes, thanks everybody. And I'm glad some people were able to join, and hopefully people will be able to look at the recording, which will be made available. And all I can say is technology is both a good and a pain in the ass thing.
I agree. And we thank you all for being here today. And it is recorded, and I will be sending out a mass email to all the 1,337 people that registered for this event. And we so apologize. But like I said, we're a library. We learn every day. And we encourage you to sign up for summer reading. We encourage you to buy the book. It is gorgeous if you haven't seen it. And it's available through Moad's bookstore. And I will be sending everybody a follow-up email with all of this great information and the link to the recording.
I also wanted to add that even if you're not in the United States, for the first time ever, you can buy our book. So please do so, because this is the first time since the book came out in 2006 that it is available worldwide, not just in the United States.
Although people from other parts of the world seem to be aware of it and have gotten copies anyway, which is pretty amazing. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.